Imagine watching a pop star struggle on stage while thousands of fans fiercely insist, that nothing is wrong. This critique analyzes your recent commentary, examining the public discourse, fan reactions, and performance changes surrounding Ariana Grande's physical appearance on her latest tour.
Yeah, and diving straight into the first piece of feedback, the material relies heavily on visual observation to unofficially diagnose a health condition, which leaves the central argument vulnerable to dismissal by critics.
Right. I mean, stepping back, the writer has done an incredible job capturing this massive, fascinating gap between what we observe and what fan communities aggressively demand we believe.
Oh, absolutely. It's a brilliant sociological observation. But when we look at how that's argued on the page, there's a major weakness. The commentary explicitly states she is clinically underweight, right?
Yeah, estimating she's under 95 or even 80 pounds.
Exactly. And it interprets these backstage items, like aspartame-free gum and black-iced coffee, as definitive proof of starvation.
And that creates a huge vulnerability. By presenting amateur medical speculation as absolute fact, the argument inadvertently hands detractors an easy excuse to dismiss the entire piece as just, mere gossip or body shaming.
Which completely dilutes the much stronger underlying point about fan delusion.
It really does. I mean, I see what the writer is going for with the vivid language, like comparing the visual of her on stage to a non-ripped Skeletor. It paints a very stark picture, but it's like being a courtroom lawyer. If you push circumstantial visual evidence too hard as absolute scientific proof, the jury dismisses the entire case.
That's a great analogy.
You might have their attention, but the moment the defense says, hey, you don't actually have a medical chart to back up this 80-pound claim, you lose all your credibility.
Right. So my question is there a risk that focusing solely on the medical speculation might overlook the much more fascinating sociology of the fan base's denial?
Oh, 100%.
Because the audience reading this already knows the controversy exists. They've seen the TikToks, but when you start guessing specific numbers on a scale, you're stepping out of cultural commentary and into, a rigid medical diagnostic space.
Where you just don't have the empirical data to survive scrutiny.
Exactly. So the suggestion here is to shift the analytical lens away from diagnosing the individual's specific medical status and instead focus the critique on the broader cultural ecosystem, specifically the toxic positivity of fan culture and the PR mechanisms of the entertainment industry.
I love that. Because audience behavior is something you can actually prove, right? You have the receipts from the comment section.
Yeah, you have this wild psychological phenomenon of people collectively enforcing a narrative of normalcy despite obvious visual changes. That is where the gold is.
So instead of debating whether she weighs 80 or 95 pounds as a concrete example, you can analyze the psychology of those fan comments. Explore why audiences feel so incredibly compelled to fiercely defend this normalcy.
What does it say about our modern parasocial relationship, that a fan will literally argue with their own eyes to protect a pop star's image?
It turns it into an essay about us, the consumers, rather than just an attack on her.
Which is such a rich vein to tap into. Another concrete approach is to reframe how you use that backstage vanity.
Right. Currently, it's used as an investigative gotcha moment, like look at the black coffee and the sugar-free gum, therefore eating disorder.
But what if you used it as a jumping-off point to discuss how the industry normalizes intense, arguably unhealthy regimens over holistic well-being? I mean, the draft already notes aspartame-free gum is used to preserve vocal.
That's a brilliant detail.
Yeah. So pivot the argument from she's starving herself to look at how this industry demands absolute vocal preservation and physical perfection, even if it means running on just caffeine and specialized gum.
It elevates it from a tabloid accusation to a systemic critique. And obviously, these are just a few out of all possible ways to pivot the angle from medical diagnosis to cultural critique.
Exactly. The core objective is just to remove the easily attackable medical guess, replace them with unassailable cultural observations.
And that fierce fan denial doesn't just stop at physical appearance, right? It bleeds directly into how they make excuses for live performances, which brings us to the next section.
Yes. Moving on to the second critique, the assessment of her stage presence introduces competing variables for her lethargy without systematically resolving them, inadvertently weakening the main thesis.
This is such a common pitfall in analytical writing. You accidentally introduce a confounding variable. You're trying to prove A causes B, her physical decline causes lack of energy. But then you introduce C.
The text asserts she has lost her sauce and is just hesitantly bopping around rather than executing full choreography.
Right.
But then it simultaneously points out that she is wearing an incredibly restrictive dress and 6-inch stilettos, and it contrasts this sharply with Taylor Swift's practical block heels and leotards.
Which hands the audience a highly logical alternative explanation for the hesitant dancing. By bringing up the wardrobe, the argument that her low energy is purely health-induced becomes logically compromised.
When the reader hits that paragraph, they immediately think, well, of course she's barely moving, she's wearing impossible shoes.
As I understand it from the notes, the argument here is that she's lacking energy, but the text also clearly highlights she's trying to dance in 6-inch stilettos. If we admit the shoes are impossible to dance in, doesn't that entirely absolve the performer of the low energy critique?
That makes sense, but could the evidence also support a different conclusion? What if we looked at it from the perspective that the wardrobe is a symptom of the physical limitations rather than the cause?
Oh, wow. Is she not dancing because of the dress, or did she choose the dress because she cannot dance?
Exactly. It's a classic symptom versus cause dilemma. But either way we interpret it, the suggestion is to reconcile these conflicting variables explicitly by using a process of elimination, demonstrating why the wardrobe alone does not fully explain the performance deficit.
You have to systematically close those escape hatches you've opened for the audience's logic. You can't just drop the heavy dress factor and leave it hanging there as a convenient out.
So a concrete way to achieve this is to explore whether the choice to wear restrictive clothing and skip the standard performance boot camp post-Wicked was a deliberate staging decision, like specifically designed to mask a lack of physical stamina.
That's a great point. We could argue the dress is a highly convenient, engineered excuse by her team. If you can't do the choreography anymore, put on a dress that makes choreography impossible. Right?
And let the fans blame the designer. Another way to systematically eliminate the wardrobe defense is to acknowledge the severe constraints early on, but then contrast it with her historical performances.
Oh, yeah. Because she successfully executed complex choreography and challenging outfits in the past.
Exactly. Proving that a heavy dress in stilettos alone cannot account for the current change. You basically say to the reader, yes, the dress is hard to move in, but she used to do backflips in outfits exactly like this. So what changed?
It forces the reader to confront the physical decline rather than hiding behind the costume design. And keep in mind, these are just a few of the many ways to resolve this logical contradiction.
Right, but the goal is to make sure the reader isn't left thinking the wardrobe is the sole reason for the drop-off. You can't leave competing evidence lying on the floor unresolved.
Yeah, you have to show you've thought of the counter-arguments before the reader even has a chance to form them, which really highlights the severity of the stamina issue.
Definitely.
But stepping back from the immediate tour evidence, the critique naturally zooms out to look at the macro, long-term implications. And we hit what might be the most crucial structural element of the entire piece.
Yes, the third piece of feedback, the comparison to a previous pop star's delayed disclosure of her struggles, is a highly compelling thematic anchor that currently sits too late in the discussion to effectively shape the narrative.
This is arguably the biggest missed opportunity in the draft's architecture. It's this absolutely brilliant historical parallel, but it's just like hiding at the finish line.
The material introduces the precedent of Taylor Swift's 2020 Miss Americana documentary and her retrospective admission of an eating disorder hidden during the 2010s, right at the very end of the script.
As an ironic prediction of what Ariana Grande might do in her 30s or 40s.
Right, and relegating this incredibly strong historical precedent to the conclusion makes it feel like an afterthought. It completely misses a major opportunity to give the entire piece a robust predictive framework.
Because when I'm reading the notes, the specific details about the tour and the fans are interesting, but it feels like isolated commentary, almost like just complaining about one specific pop star.
But then you hit that Taylor Swift comparison at the end, and suddenly it's like, look, we've seen this exact movie before.
Exactly. But if I can push back for a second, if we move the Taylor Swift comparison to the very beginning, do we run the risk of hijacking the focus away from the actual subject of the piece?
That's clearly laid out. I wonder, though, if we've considered how establishing a historical baseline actually makes the current observations feel more objective and less like an isolated attack.
Oh, I see.
Framing is very different from distracting. If you open with a well-documented historical precedent of a massive pop star hiding an eating disorder in plain sight while millions cheered her on, you instantly legitimize everything you're about to say about Ariana.
It's no longer just a subjective opinion. It's a documented historical pattern playing out again in real time.
Right. So the suggestion is to restructure the commentary to introduce this historical precedent much earlier, using it as a structural framing device to validate the current observations and contextualize the cycle of celebrity denial.
A framing device completely changes the psychology of the reader. It primes them to be highly skeptical of the current fan denial because you've just reminded them of how everyone denied the Taylor Swift situation for an entire decade.
You're playing on their cultural amnesia and curing it right before you make your main argument. So a concrete way to execute this is to actually open the entire commentary with the Miss Americana revelation.
Establish right away that Hollywood has a well-documented history of hiding these issues in plain sight.
Yes, and then filter all the current fan discourse through that established historical lens.
You're saying to the reader, we completely missed it back then, and here is exactly how fans are refusing to see it now. That sets a tone of investigative sociology.
Another option is to weave side-by-side comparative analysis throughout the entire piece. Directly contrast the fan denial of the 2010s with the fan denial of today.
Oh, like when fans currently call her petite and naturally small, you juxtapose that with identical media attitudes from the 1989 era for Taylor.
Exactly. You demonstrate that history is repeating itself. And again, these structural realignments are just a few possible ways of solving the pacing problem.
But whatever method you choose, your best, most contextualizing piece of evidence needs to do heavy lifting throughout the narrative, not just take a quick bow at the curtain call.
It really evolves the argument from a hot take into a definitive piece of cultural criticism.
Well, let's pull all these threads together into an actionable summary. Today, we covered shifting the analytical lens away from an amateur medical diagnosis of weight and diet toward a broader cultural critique of fan delusion and PR mechanisms.
We also discussed actively resolving the conflicting performance variables, specifically logically eliminating the stiletto defense, so it doesn't undermine your argument about physical stamina.
And finally, front-loading the historical precedent of the Miss Americana documentary so that it serves as the foundation for the entire narrative rather than an afterthought.
Just logically engineer this piece so that every point supports the whole, making your structural foundation impossible to shake.
We warmly invite you to apply these structural and thematic adjustments and submit your revised work back in for another round of feedback. We'd love to see where you take this.